Yes.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you. Cool. Thanks for coming out. It's funny you mentioned growth. This meetup tends to ebb and flow in its sizes. So yeah, the more you come and the more you talk about it. I've only been here, this is probably my 5th or 6th time total. I'm not a frequenter always. That's only because I live on the south end of the valley. So yeah, I'm happy to be here though today. Excited to talk about what we're going to talk about. So out of curiosity, by raise of hand, how many of you have built a single page application before? Cool. How many of you think that building single page applications is easy? Awesome. Cool. Not a lot of us, right? None of us really would agree with that. How many have used React.JS? Okay. That's awesome. What about Redux? The curse word, right? Redux is funny because Redux is actually at its core, it's very, very simple. I think the biggest headaches is like you're trying to learn React and then you move over to this new state thing and it just has all these boilerplates. You have this actions file and then you have this like little connect function that you don't know what it's doing, right? You don't know what's going on there because there's so much magic and you pass stuff to it and all of a sudden you have this magical props in your component due to this functional paradigm. There's some craziness, right? You could learn what it's doing in a matter of a few days, and even if you're just a brand new learner. It's not very complicated, but there's a lot of words and a lot of things there that you have to type into it. Now, when Redux kind of blossomed, I was just barely learning React, so I feel like I may be in the same camp as a lot of you guys, where it's like, why do I need this thing, and what is it doing that React doesn't give me as well? Well, the idea is that we wanted to simplify our state, right? Take the data that our application is going to be concerned with and centralize it in one single storage, right? One little place, and then we can basically get a flow, right? So when a user clicks on something or does something different, we trigger an action that will go and simply return an object that tells our reducer that our state has changed. And we have this beautiful, immutable, functional state tree that just it just works, and it's so awesome when you get it to work. But how many of us have been through the pains of trying to get Redux to work, and it's like, what the crap am I doing, and am I really actually benefiting from this thing? So the idea came out because of the Flux paradigm that the React team built and started using, and everyone just adopted it. It just was every job description out there is React Redux, we need React Redux, React Redux. It's crazy, right? But my opinion at the time was that we don't always need Redux, right? We reached to it too quickly. And I worked at a company where I was dead set on convincing my boss that we needed Redux because everyone was using it and it's going to simplify everything. And if we I was one of 4 engineers and I was the only front-end guy. And so I was like, I want to do it in my project. Like, this is my thing. And he said, no, right? He gave me the big no. And I'm so glad that he did. And it wasn't until a couple weeks later that Ryan Florence's magical talk a couple years ago at React.JS came out about why we don't potentially need Redux for every single thing out there. Not all of our problems are nails, so not all of our solutions are hammers, right? So because of its mass adoption, people just flocked to it and used it. Now, recently, React, for state management, has made something available to us that was already there, but now it's just stable. And it's a lot more easier, so to speak, to use, okay? And it's this thing called context, okay? So in a React application, a traditional React Redux application, you could potentially have, excuse me, component level state. Oh my goodness. Sorry, I won't do that too many times for the YouTube followers, hopefully. You could have component level state, and then you can have application level state with your Redux data store, right? But this context API sort of changes that. And they give us sort of this ability to use this thing called context. And using context, we can actually achieve some of the benefits that Redux gives us that simply using component state that simply using component state doesn't, right? So some of this idea of this kind of paradigm of shared state across multiple components that may not be direct descendants of one another, right? So how do you achieve that in React? Vanilla React, thank you so much. In vanilla React, you have to do a lot of craziness. And when I was working at the company that I was working for, and we didn't have Redux, there were some times that I wish that I had it, just to store something there so that when I route it over to another component that's like a totally different part of the application tree, I could have it, okay? But context sort of solves this problem, this React problem where data flow is, parent to child or unidirectional. It just goes kind of down one tree, where you can actually put some context, put some state in a component, and then share it anywhere in your application. It doesn't matter where. So the idea here is that we get the ability to tap into this API in a more user-friendly way. Now, this API has been here with React for a while. Things like React Redux, styled components. I believe MobX use this API already. And so there most likely will be a big, giant refactor to Redux in the near future, so look forward to that. And having to go back and refactor everything like we always have to do if we are on the latest and greatest technology. But yeah, so that's what I'm getting at here, is that we now have another solution that is not just component level state and a giant library to manage our state. And that's where we're going to go today. The application that we're going to look at today is actually pretty trivial by nature. It's actually, we can actually build a couple of applications within the application, so little mini components and things like that, and kind of play around with some things. But I have something built, and we're going to talk about it. So let me just take a sip of water real quick. Awesome. Before we get started, does anyone have any questions? How many of you have used context so far? Haha, cool. Probably seen the 10 or 12 YouTube videos that are out there on the subject, like I did like a few months ago, so that I could tell Ken that I want to do this thing and actually learn it so that I could present it tonight.
I do have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
And this is not just on the context API, but also with meetups. Does it give you the ability to manage state with unrelated components? So in the file structure, they do not share any same hierarchy of parents or anything. So you have an application, you built this part out in React, you built this part out in React. They're not related at all. Can the context API still manage state from one of the unrelated components to another?
Yes, and the way that happens is you're about to see how that happens. But you basically compose your state the same way you would compose your components. So you want like reusable components. And let's say that I have component A over here, component B over here. They're completely unrelated in nature and the state tree, right? But up here, I have a provider that I could reach into and consume that provider for either one of those components at any given time. So that's the idea here. We're going to build composable state, right? We're going to compose together. I don't know if this term will catch on, but I like it, composed state. So maybe some of you all will take advantage of that and tweet about it later.
What are some of the fundamental differences between Redux and context?
Context comes directly with React 16.3, so it's not a separate package. And you don't need anything like Redux or React Redux to get it wired into your application. You simply subscribe to the create context API. And it's really straightforward after that. Well, there's a learning curve. I struggled with it for a minute because I'm so used to components and Redux and things like that. Anyone else? Cool. You guys are great. So I just want to caveat this conversation. I am going to be building an application that does this, the thing that they're saying not to use context for directly, okay? So just a caveat there, I am not from Facebook. I am not the industry expert on this subject. So I have a smaller, trivial application that'll help us sort of learn what's going on here. But the application of this example can be used across various different situations, okay? Yes?
You might cover this later, but why do they recommend not using it in that case?
I think so many people are just so excited to not freaking pass props down so many billions of times. And this is my honest opinion. The React team is saying, we don't want you to reach for this just the same way that you reach for Redux. We don't want you to overuse this thing. Even though I don't foresee any problems with that, but I'll eat my foot,
Quick question.
my hat later.
You mentioned the MobX use this API. Have you ever used Mob? Is it called? I don't use Redux. I use MobX.
Right.
And it's way easier. It's
Right. It is.
So,
MobX is amazing.
So, which one do you think that is better, using this one or MobX? Because MobX is the easiest way to.
Sure. I think they're different, and they have different contexts. All right. So they have different applications. So reaching for context would be, I don't necessarily need something that's a third-party library to plug into my application. The Facebook team is now saying anything that you potentially could do with that, you can solve with this. However, it's not the Redux killer. In fact, Dan Abramoff tweeted out after they announced sort of a lot of this stuff, he tweeted out, never create anything ever. And he's the author of Redux, right? And so he was pretty upset when they were like, people were touting this as the Redux killer. In my opinion, it's not. There's going to be a time and a place for Redux. There's going to be a time and a place for context. And we're not going to get away from set state. So how many of you hate set state, this.setState? How many of you hate that function? Okay, that's not going away. We're always going to be there, all right? So, okay, all right. Okay, so their examples from their documentation use this across like a theme. So if you've ever themed out an application, you have to change colors or something based on a user clicking a blue button or whatever. It's a really cool concept the way that they built this out. I really enjoyed the documentation here. We're just going to take it and we're going to use a smaller application here. Okay, so in this app, if you notice, we have, I've just used create React app, so my beautiful gray background header here, and my H1 and some of my sans serif styling. That comes straight out of the box with create React app. So this is all we have right here. We have essentially an application, and that should be high enough font. If I need to bump anything up, please just shout at me, and I will. So if you notice here inside of our React dev tools, I just have my app, and it takes in person, okay, which takes in a component called Fred. And Fred's purpose is to just render out this content that's being passed to him, okay? So this is where we get into the prop drilling problem, right? We have up on our app state, we have a name and an age that we're passing down to person. And we'll get into the to-do app in a minute, so don't worry, that's commented out for a reason. So we pass the name and the state down. There's a couple of other ways we could achieve this, but just to be super semantic and super straightforward, I wanted to say that name is set to the this.state.name, and then our age is set to this.state.age. So great, we have those variables available to us as props in our next component. So let's go down to person, who is our container component, essentially. This component is super dumb. All it's doing is taking props and passing them to Fred. So Fred could, eventually, as we go out and refactor this and get some live dynamic data, person could, sort of be a dynamic function as well. We could potentially pass down this information. But right now, it's just static and stupid, right? It's just simple. But Fred, all it does is receive all of the props. So we basically take the props and that lovely spread operator that Sean was showing us earlier with the REST parameters, we're just spreading those props over this component. So we're saying name, props.name will be equal to name, and then props.age will also be equal to age. So, and so now in Fred, we can consume that data. So we have this sort of middleman component, right? If I open up Fred, I'll open them up side by side here. And we'll go back to person so that we can see what's going on. Once again, person is simply just taking in Fred and passing the props down to him, okay? And Fred is just consuming those props and giving us our lovely little printed out string. Hello, my name is props.name, and I am props.age, okay? So the idea here is that Fred is doing nothing important for us. It's just a component that is receiving props and passing them down, okay? So now we are going to shake it up. We're going to break our application. Let's see if I save and if I go over to here, now all of a sudden we don't, well, we have, hello, my name is, and I am blank years old, right? We have this problem. Person should be passing down those props to Fred. However, Fred is not receiving those props. So we broke our app. Let's fix it. Let's figure out what we're going to do here. Okay? So these components live directly in a component file or a component directory here, and I can just access them wherever I want within my application. Okay? So I'm going to build a context here. Okay? So we're going to take this state and we're going to say bye-bye to this state. So no longer will our app function use state here. We're going to use that on our theme, or on our, not our theme, sorry, our context. Okay? So we're going to build a context. And I hope that, I mean, I've done this a few times now, but bear with me as I introduce bugs into my application. So the first thing that I'm going to do is create a file, and we're going to call it Fred context, or we'll just call it person context so that it's yeah, reusable in such a way. So person context is going to be a stateful component. So we want it to be a class component. So I'm just going to use a little shortcut here that just builds my component for me. So React snippets, I can't recommend it enough. Okay, and then now our person context is ready to rock and roll, but we need to use some of the, sorry, I'm not going to import there. Sorry, okay. We're going to use that context API. And how we use it, it's right on the React default object. So I'm going to say const person context. Sorry, what I need to do is change this to person provider, and I'll show you why in just a minute. Because I'm going to make this variable right here our person context. Okay? So person context from ERF. I'm used to typing on my other keyboard, so give me a while to adjust to this chiclet keyboard today. Okay, person context is going to equal React.create, and it's camel cased, context. Now, when we instantiate this variable here, person context, it's going to come with it a couple of things. We're going to get a provider component and a consumer component. Okay? I'll print that out to the screen just so that we see what's going on. I'll console.log person context here so we see it. Now, I gave this an object. You could give this any default value, and then anywhere you use this context, you could have that value available, right? So your value, whatever, you know, if you don't provide a value to this, you could have that value available to you. So that's what's cool about this little object here. It's just a placeholder default value, okay? And then so that we don't have any weird code breaking, I'm going to say person provider, and it doesn't like that just being out in the open space of a class, so I'm going to actually put that down there, okay? And the last thing that I want to actually do is not only export this as our default, as we're doing down here, I'm going to actually export our context. So we're going to make it available. Now, my suspicion is that in the works, there's 15 or so different engineers that are about ready to publish their open source library that's going to do that type of thing for you, so that you don't have to define your context and then export it and then use it, you know, as a non-default object. That's just my suspicion. My guess is there's going to be a dozen different libraries out there just to consume context. But this is how you would do it if you don't have that available. So, and there might be other opportunities for that. Okay, so let's look at our person provider. I'm going to pass it into our app just so that we can get that console log printed out for us. So really, it's not really a provider yet. Actually, I copied that. There we go. Cool. And we'll just default it that way. Import in our person provider. Contexts / person context. Cool. So that's the default object, which is why I import it that way. So let's go take a look at what we just achieved, what comes out of this context for us. Remember, we're console logging the person context. So we get consumer and provider right there. We can use those, and now that's how you're going to set this up so that on your provider component, you're going to have state. And then wherever we want that state, we can consume it wherever we want. Okay? So yeah, and notice it's mounting it to the screen so we have our little person provider. Okay, nothing big and fancy happened there. But remember, we're going to take this state and we're going to say, app, you're doing away with state now. So before we go crazy, we're going to just comment out person so we don't get too many errors. And I'm going to leave this out as well. So our app should be nothing right now. Cool? Actually, it should have a title. There it is. Cool. All right. At least that's there. Awesome. So in our person context, I've created this default object, this default class, as person provider. Okay? So what I can do here is, as I'm rendering out this class, I'm going to render it out in place of this div with the provider. Okay? And so we have to say person context dot provider. And you could do this where you sort of pull down these variables in other ways, but for now, and we have our state, which is going to equal name of Freddie, age of 32. I think Fred Flintstone's about 32 years old. I'm not sure, though. Maybe much older than that. OK. So yeah, and we can get rid of this little console log. So what we've essentially done here is we've created our provider. So this is going to be the component that we subscribe to anywhere we want the state that this component is going to hold onto it. It's going to hold this state for us as a composed component, right? It's just sitting there, and anything we pass to this now and wrap this with, we're going to have, okay? But we have a problem. We need to render any children that get wrapped in our person provider. So we're just going to say this.props.children, and React knows what to do with that, which is something that's super beautiful, okay? And then we also have another problem. Right now, we're not sending down our data, right? We're not giving this provider our data. So how would I do that? In React, normally what would be the first thing that you want to do if you want to pass data down to the component that you're rendering out? Pass it down as props, right? So there is a special prop on the provider that's called value. This is actually something you need to use, okay? So value is very important. Value is the value of the thing that you're trying to pass down to your other components. So in this case, we're just going to send down, why not all the state for now, okay? And because we're in a class, we're still using the this keyword, and it's reaching up for that state, and we're good to go. So that's it. That's how you create a provider. Anywhere you want state in your application now, we're going to wrap this around a component, and then we're going to be able to use that anywhere in the state tree with that component, okay? With the consumer. So the provider you can think of as the content or the data provider for your application. It's got a very semantic name. I love that. It's providing your application with data. Up until this point, who has any questions?
So would your provider relate that to like a Redux store?
Yes. If you wanted like 15 or 30 different Redux stores in your application. Think of it as a decentralized store. So it's not one area. You can create a store over here, or over here, or over here. But you create the provider. And you just subscribe to the content when the consumer needs it. Yes?
So just for clarification, in your app.js, you're just importing person context or person provider and then wrapping your components in the person provider?
Yep, so that's exactly what we're going to do. We're not going to do this globally, though. We're going to do it section by section where we need the state. So that's what's really cool. We're going to import that into the app, but we're not going to wrap the whole app at first in our provider that we just created. So our single provider here, remember, we are defaulting this object to person provider. So where we want to use this, we're going to take it and we're going to put it anywhere in our application. Okay? And so that's going to be, for us, it's going to be inside of app.js. So now that person lives here, we have no more state in this component. We have our person provider. So person now is going to be a direct descendant of our context, okay, of our provider. So I can say person provider. Oh, what? Hotkeys and stuff. Why did that happen again? What am I doing? There we go. Okay, so I found a good hotkey there. Open up my user settings. Yeah, exactly. Okay, now I need to delete this stuff because otherwise we're going to break without it, right? We're going to try and reference an object that doesn't exist, and it's going to give us an error. So let's see what we just effectively achieved. We wrapped our person, right, inside of our provider. Okay, so person and any of its subsequent children, it doesn't matter if Fred has Bevels, or Pebbles, I almost said Bam Bam, mix it, yeah. So, and they had kids and whatever, all the way down the descendant tree, anywhere there's a provider, we can consume that data with the consumer. So this is where things start to get fun, as I like to say. I say that often. I have fun way too much. So inside now of our person component, we need to tell, oh, not person, because person, remember, doesn't care, right? Person is a component that couldn't give any cares about the data that we're giving it. What we do care about is Fred, though, okay? So Fred needs to know about this context. So let's import our context to Fred. And we're going to import the non-default object here, which is our person context from probably back a directory and into contexts. And notice that I chose to separate my components from context. There's probably going to be 32 Medium articles tomorrow about how you should organize your context. Doesn't matter. I don't care. The purpose is to learn this thing, right? We'll learn about file structure later. So I'll put my contexts where they belong. OK. So what's interesting right now is that if I were to look at my application, and we haven't done anything yet to consume this data, but if I were to look at my application, I can jump inside of React, and I can see what we have done effectively here. So person provider is now wrapping our person. And if you notice, this little component is built called the context provider. And it's saying, hey, what lives on the context provider are the value of name and age, respectively. So we have our state. We have it available. We now just have to consume it. And person doesn't care about that state, but Fred does. So that's what we're going to achieve. Fred needs to know about that state, so this string actually makes sense, right? OK. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go person context dot consumer. Wrap this bad boy up. Okay. Now we're going to get a nasty error. Render is not a function. What the crap? Why? I mean, I went all that work. Why can't I just pull off like these props? Why aren't they there? Well, it's because this is treated differently than a regular React component. Okay. This is treated specially. So they wanted to make sure that you knew that you were using context when you were using it. Which I don't know if that's the reason. That's my hunch. I have a lot of hunches. But let's go and see this consumer use case. How do we use consumer? What is consumer going to do for us? Notice that it says render something based on the context value. OK, what the crap is this thing? What is this JavaScript, this function? So we use what's called, and who knows what this is called, by the way? A render prop, right? And it's such a cool, hip thing to use in React. I really enjoy using render props, especially with the version 4 React router. Instead of that has saved my bacon many a time. I was super excited to learn that when it came out. So I'm a big fan. I really like the render prop, but it's not super straightforward as you would think. Okay? So we need to wrap this in what's called a render prop, which is essentially just a function that returns some JavaScript, some JSX, right? A function that returns some DOM-like stuff. Okay? So you can read all about it here on the docs, which I highly recommend doing. Now that you've kind of seen this demo, and you're probably going to go home and watch 13 others that will confuse you a lot less than mine. But this idea is we are going to, because we're in JSX, this is the best part, we can just write JavaScript. So I can say, they say to use context or value. I've seen it in many different ways. But what do we care about here? We care about our data. So I care about our data. And so now, if I wrap this, so just for intents and purposes of wrapping this so I can get a function block and console.log our data, your minds are about to be blown, maybe. Props is not defined, so because props is not defined, your name, you're not going to be super emphatic about it. So we'll just do this. I'm just going to comment that out. Look at that. Our data is there, right? Right there in the render, from the render prop. So that's it. So this is our render function. We are in JSX land, so anything we write in those curly braces, we can write vanilla JavaScript, and it's good to go. So data is going to be a parameter, okay, that the person context.provider will supply with its argument, and that argument will be your value, okay. So let's look at this side by side, so that we get some context, right? So right here, our value, anything that's defined here, this object, will become our data. Okay? So let that sink in for just a second. So anything that's on that value will become that data. We're going to come back to this when our data gets a little bit more complicated. And how much time do I... Okay. All right. Cool. All right. So yeah, now our data will be, this is going to be more important when we actually get to more sophisticated data. So we're going to build a little to-do app. It's going to be awesome. Okay. Here we go. First thing we're going to do, though, is fix our Fred statement so that Fred is announcing to the world who he is. So instead of saying props.name, I need to supply props with data. Okay, we got it. Fantastic. And let's see if Fred is telling us who he is. There it is. So that's exactly how you would get around the prop drilling idea, right? Instead of saying, I want to pass my props from app to person to Fred, it's like, let's just put our props somewhere else. And let's make Fred subscribe to that on his own. So now that our person function isn't doing anything in particular at all, it's just returning something that we can use. We can return as many of these things as we want, right? And they'll all just be dynamic at that point because we'll refactor our code to make it that way. But in this case, yeah, we're just simply providing our information, and anything that's a child, okay, that's wrapped in this person provider, will be able to subscribe to that using the consumer. And that's where things get really, really fun, okay? So we've seen it with the most trivial example possible, your Hello World app with React. Let's see it with your next least trivial example possible, and we are going to make a little to-do list, which is already built, but we're going to refactor it to use context, okay? So refactor to use context. Awesome. So all we're doing is adding stuff. We're not deleting or anything. Come on. We're just adding stuff to a list and rendering it to a screen. But let's take a look under the hood. We have a full to-do app component in our application. Let's go over there. To-do app contains some state. A little bit more sophisticated information here, right? We have a to-dos array on our state, which takes an object, which is an example of a to-do, okay? So our task will be learn something. I have a default object in there. And we'll delete that as we want later. And then a completed flag so that eventually when I want to make this more sophisticated, I could check off the to-dos, right? And then an ID that's just set to a date.now. That's the data that we concern ourselves with. Then we also have this little task string, okay? That is going to be the representation of our new task that we're going to build. So when we actually handle our input change, when I type in that little input field, we're going to set that task, okay? That task is going to be just set right there. It's going to be stored on our state. And then when we need that, we're going to press that button that says add to do, and it's going to go and make a copy of our state because we're immutable programmers, right? We like immutability in this room, right? Okay, make a copy of your to-do list, okay? Don't just push things into your to-dos, your state willy-nilly like we're going to do. We're going to copy it first. Now we're going to make our task be this object with a new ID, completed flag, and anything that was on that string will be pushed into our copy, which we then replace our old state with our new copy, right? And then we'll reset the task. So that way we type, we hit enter, and it resets it to an empty string. Let's see how this all works real quick again, just so that you have an idea. I'm typing some amazing task, and I'm going to hit enter. It's going to reset this to an empty string. Let's see what's on state. I always like to peek what's on state. I don't know about you guys, but the React Dev Tools, amazing stuff. All of Jared Forsyth's work that went into that, absolutely incredible, okay? So let's actually add this to our to-do list array. Right now you see that there are only 2 items in there, and we'll watch this task reset to an empty string. So you notice everything that I just said actually happened, and you see we have some amazing task. And because of that, we can pass this data around, okay? So we're passing to-dos down to our to-do list separate component. Its only purpose right now is to render to-dos, okay? So if you go there, you'll see that it's just, I'm using this React fragment. Don't worry about that right now. It just allows you to not have divs everywhere in your application, let's put it that way, okay? That are unnecessary, right? So another cool feature that has recently come out is the new way you can use the fragment, okay? But this is just going to be a list of our to-dos. So for each item in our array, return us a new array of stuff, okay? Which is what map does. Give React an array of items. It will take those array of items, and whatever you return will be added to the DOM, added to the screen, right? So we're giving this an array of to-dos, mapping over our data, displaying a div for each item, okay? And then our ID is our key so that we don't get that awesome warning, and then our task is just a to-do task, right? Okay. All right. Overstepped my welcome on the explanation of the to-do app, but the last thing is that we have this to-do form, which we need to pass all these things down to it, right? Imagine if we wanted this form to be reusable. We wanted it to just consume a context that was different. And imagine if you had 4 different contexts that could use the same form. So you're starting to see, I'm starting to see, we're all starting to see the bigger picture here, the idea of why you would want to do something like this. So let's create a context to hold this data, and not only hold this data, we're also going to create a context to hold our methods as well, okay? So hold on tight. It's going to get pretty awesome. Make a new file, to-do.context.js, and we're going to, what? Whoa. Whoa. Thank you. Thank you. That actually really does help. So we'll, wrong shortcut. Cool. And I'm going to call this to-do provider. I know that's weird to name your whatever, so don't, yeah, fight me. To-do provider. Okay. And then I will export a constant that is our, wow. So we're going to create this variable. Matt, I just had a brain fart. Okay, so export a variable called to-do.context as React.create, not element, come on. What is this, day 1? Context. And give it a default value just to have it there for us, okay? So now we are going to make this our provider. So to-do context.provider. And then we will render out any children props.children that get passed into this context, okay? Now here's where things start to get fun. We're going to take our to-do app. We're going to cut it of its state. I know, right? It's scary. And we're going to break everything, of course. All this stuff is not going to be defined, so what we're going to do, we have those components. We'll make them consume this data, okay? In this case, let's start with the to-do list, right? What I want to do is first, whoa, I get it. That's fun. Okay. Wow. Backwards. There we go. Cool. I always love commenting out JSX when it works. Okay, but now we just have this list. It's going to be an empty array for now until we give it what it needs to. Okay. It's not rendering anything, but we can see that in our app, we have our to-do app, right? So let's wrap both of these components. Instead of wrapping them in this div, let's wrap them in our provider so that both of these components, where they live in the application, can consume this data. Okay? So I'm going to import in our to-do provider from, we'll go back directory into context and find to-do context. Cool? And now we shall wrap them up. And if we notice, our to-do app has to-do provider around its children. Our to-do list, we commented out the other one, okay? So now, what we need to do is actually supply this with its data. This is composing the data, okay? So we're going to go into our to-do context, and we are going to say everything that's here, we're going to build an object on our value prop, okay? And on that value prop, we want a couple of extra things. So we're going to give this an object. We're going to say state equals this.state. So that's just going to be all the data that we want this concerned with, okay? And let's take a look at what happens now. And ignore the methods for a minute, because we're going to get to those in just a second. So now, our to-dos gets our empty array. Oh no, that should be empty. Okay, I was like, why is that empty? But look at value. Value is now, when we subscribe to it with our consumer, we're going to be able to call state.foo or whatever. Okay? So that's going to be sort of the separation of concerns here. We have data that we concern ourselves with, and then we're going to have some methods that we concern ourselves with. Those methods, I think we're going to call actions, and I think everyone's going to cheer when we call them that. Okay? Or maybe you'll despise me for putting that in your head. Okay.
With going along off of that real quick, when you pass down certain parts of the states, you have the idea here that you kind of want to go off the same, but you don't want them taking everything down.
So I think I know what you're getting at, and it's the first thing that I saw. And I was like, we're going to be passing state everywhere, right? And then we're going to have this random bits of state in providers that we're putting into other parts of our application. What if the consumer doesn't need that portion of the state? Because you saw that empty string, and you're like, that list doesn't need that, right? Yeah. I thought the same thing, and I don't have an affirmative answer for that on you right now, or on that. So I want to research that, because when I first saw that, I was like, we're going to be doing this thing. It's going to be passing all this stuff around. But really, we're just putting it on the provider. Okay. And now anywhere we consume it, we're going to consume it. It's going to be there, but we don't have to consume it, right? Yeah. So it might get a little messy. So obviously, one of the main reasons why they said, don't reach for this automatically. But it could be the Redux killer or whatever, okay? In this case, we just need those children. So we need to go now to our to-do list, and we need to consume that content. So import our non-default object, to-do-context, from, where are we? I always get lost. I have to look at my sidebar. To-do-context. Cool. And we're going to call, I wonder if I could just non-fragment this now. Dare I be brave? Let's try it. To-do-context.consumer. I'm thinking about it. And now, instead of rendering out all this stuff here, we need to wrap it and say data is going to return. And we're going to have, hopefully, we did it. And this should be data.state.todos. Hey, learn context is there. Cool. All right. So now, if we look at our app, our to-do provider is available. It's giving us our state. And then our to-do list has, we can go get rid of that prop that we're passing. Our to-do list actually is consuming that state. Okay? Let's go over here. And let's go where we're using to-do list, in to-do app. That's right. And let's get rid of this. And now, we're consuming it at that level, so we don't need anything else available to it, right? So nothing needs to happen. See what happens with to-do form. And this is where some of that magic that I've been touting will actually happen, because I'm going to take this and have the audacity to delete it all. Now we need to go to to-do form before we save, import our context into another file. Notice they are sibling components, right? We're going to consume this in a different way, though. So we're going to import our context from, where are we? Do I even have to ask? Okay. And now I can wrap this div. Instead of this div, I can do to-do context.consumer. And all of the stuff that used to live on props can be done and dealt with now with our data. Well, whatever you want to call this. Sure. Props, sure.
So I know what it is.
And then we need to return. Probably need a fragment here, so bear with me. So I don't have to have a div. Fragment. Okay. Awesome. It looks nice. Thank you, Auto Formatter. Prettier for the win. Who uses prettier? Haha, you are in a good camp. Okay, and now props dot needs to go away. We need to replace it. But you'll notice that we have data dot, and then some of these are on state. The rest we're going to put on a thing called actions, just so that our minds can kind of understand what they are. Actions. Okay? Don't call it actions if you don't want to. It doesn't matter what you call it, right? I'm just going to separate these things, and yes, we are one more thing to do, and we got it. We just need to pass down these two things as actions on our provider. It's going to be an object. Okay. And we should be back to square one. Please don't break on me now. Awesome. It's really, this is like the third or fourth time that I have done this, so like the parts are there. You can do the same, okay? You can go home, you can watch the 10 or 12 YouTube videos that are out there. You can build something that you're interested in, and you can manage your data in a provider and then use that provider and consume that data anywhere in your application. Does not matter where it is. All you have to do is import the context, get the consumer, grab it off of that render prop in the back.
My consumer can assume multiple providers.
Yes. Ready for it? So you can have, okay. So your consumer can consume multiple providers. I know that you can nest providers. So maybe this will help. Okay. Sure. So what we could do real quick, this one won't take very long. We can create an authenticator or something. And we'll just say, we'll say auth provider. Okay. How many of you have built that auth component that is like the high order component in your app? And it's like, okay. Import auth provider from contexts / auth provider. Okay. We will do this as snippety as possible. And RCC. Let's get me some state. And we'll say auth false. Then we'll have a toggler. Toggle auth. Login. We'll call it toggle auth. Toggle auth because we're semantic here. And this is going to say this.setState. Here it is. We're back to set state, guys. We cannot get away from it. All right. So auth equals the opposite of what it is. And okay. And now we want this to be our auth context.provider. Okay. And then render out our children. Yep. Oh, not import. You're right. Export const auth context equals React.create context. Okay. And then the value of this will have a different, so we'll have the state as it equals stat and actions that equal toggle auth, such a good name. Okay, now, cool. So we have this set up. Let's go and wrap our app in that provider, which we've already done. So now, anywhere in here, you're going to need another fragment for this, but you'll see the point where we're using person provider here, and then we have a context that's nested deep down here. Okay. And let's just see what it looks like in the state tree right now, in the React tree. Now, I'm not saying do this, like, no matter what. Like, you could. Auth provider wraps all of our content. Person provider just wraps its person, okay? And then we have a nested as well to do provider, which wraps its children. So let's say that we create a fragment here, and we only want to render that fragment. So React.fragment. Might as well just create a div at this point. And let's say that we want to only render that if we have, so we're going to have to do, I don't want to get ahead of myself, okay? So now I'm going to say auth context, auth provider. Now I've gone and confused myself because I have to import this auth context, okay? Okay, now I can say auth context. I think I know you're all thinking where I'm going with this. So auth context dot consumer. Okay, wrap our fragment, make it auto format before I lose my marbles. And we're going to return inside of JSX. We're going to have this little render prop. Somebody wanted to call it props? Sure. You can call it whatever you want. And it's just going to return this one element. So now that that's available for us, we're going to have a button that will take our render prop, and on click, it'll call that props.actions.toggle off. And of course, you destructure this and make it however you want. And log in. Actually, that needs to be, bummer. No, this is still fine. This is still fine. OK, so we'll do that. OK. And we'll see that it's going to change some stuff for us. So right now, we're not logged in. Let's click on that and see what happens to our data. Sorry, it's one screen Tuesday for me. OK. Context consumer, where are we? Provider here is our state. Auth is false. If I click this, back to true. So we're toggling our state. Cool. So now, the last thing that we would need to do here then is hide some of this data. Say, hey, if our props.state.auth is true, then render that stuff, right? Else render null. And we are not logged into our app, but as we log in, the content's there, right? So yeah, you're not really. So to answer your question, you could potentially now consume this content elsewhere because you now have access to that props. You might just have to pass it down as props, though. I don't know. So that you're already getting yourself into this other idea. So, but yeah, it's kind of, you saw that we have 3 providers and a giant monolithic app of different apps consuming those providers. So, questions? Anything else? Yes?
Is there a recommended way to get those props from this provider in like lifecycle methods, or is the only way I can think of is just to create the component inside and pass down those props into that component?
Yeah, well, notice that anywhere I'm consuming this content, I'm pretty much using non-lifecycle. Actually, this is so this is a non-class, right? If I were to change this to a class, I could. And I could just say any of this stuff, right, or whatever. I would just say class, to-do form, extends component, whatever. And then I'm back in action. Okay? And then I just need my render function, else it will die. Okay? And then that's going to return all that still, just like normal. So you would, for lifecycle methods.
Yeah.
Ha! Light flash. Okay. I'm not sure.
The only way I can think of is to make a child component, pass in the props that you want to that child component, and that's actually your.
Yeah, that's actually going to do it.
Concerns a bit, probably allow you to filter out which component or which props you actually want.
Right. You could now have 15 different filter components that filter your props. Yeah, that's a good question. I like that. You stumped me as well.
The main reason why I use Redux or Mobex when I use it is because I need one component that is not related to another component to iterate the value of a variable. And basically, I use Redux or Mobex to call the value that everybody is basically. This guy changed it, and that guy now knows that it changed it. So it's because in this example we didn't do that one. Can one of the childs change a value, and then another child somewhere else says like, oh, it was 4, but now it's 9.
Right.
Is that possible or not?
So you're talking of a more global state is sort of the idea there?
That's mostly what I use Redux or Mobex, because I need to manipulate global states. And this can do it?
Yes, yeah, most definitely, yeah, because your consumer over here is consuming the same data that's right here, and then your consumer over here would consume, right?
Yeah, but if this one changes, the other guys will know it.
The other guys will know it. Yep.
Okay.
There's an example out there on YouTube where a guy does this, and I'm like, I don't know why you would ever want to do that, but it makes sense if you think about like a Twitter application, because think of your avatar in all the different places around Twitter, right? And so like that's an avatar, that's a singular component that you want just that data to live somewhere, and you could just provider, consumer, right? You could do it anywhere that you could do it. I'm not saying that this is the Redux killer. I don't think that's the case. I think that Redux and MobX and insert your framework du jour or library du jour here, there's plenty of opportunity for use cases there still. So I think that this will allow us to not reach for Redux quite as quickly. And it will allow us to solve some problems that the way that React was originally architected didn't provide.
So if I'm rendering different React components in an app that's not based as a React app, it just has different parts that are built on React, how do I wrap the React render method? How do I wrap that in provider, or can I?
Well, it's not, so you would want to make this component, the component that you're passing to the render, make a provider as the first child of that component, and then you'll have it anywhere that your app is being targeted. Yeah? Yes?
Do you know if this works with React Native?
It absolutely does. There's an example out there of a guy who's already using it in his theme toggler for his React Native app. In fact, anything on the React API should work in React Native that you would need, right? To get. Let's say if you know React, you know about 75% of what you need to know to be up and running with React Native. So, but I have seen it in an example. Cool. Probably.
I'm curious why you meant about this binding the functions that you're passing around.
Good question. So I'm using a new kind of next type syntax here. Okay, this is so they're not constants, right? They're static. I don't know if they're static or not. They're methods that live on the object, and so because of that, I just can pass them down as such, right?
If you didn't use an arrow function, right? If you did not use an arrow function
Right.
for this method, you would have to find.
Right.
These arrow functions, they have implicit content.
That's right.
So they are looking up to the parent to figure out what is its own context, whereas the normal function has its own, and it's weird because we're using that word for context again. It's like
Yeah.
it's a different context. The scope is a little bit different though, like the same context.
No, what he's saying is right. The lexical binding of the this keyword is funky with arrow functions. Just know that, and then go look that up, and you'll have a really nice time rabbit holing in that. It's
Probably more what you expect.
exactly. No, that's totally true. I have a lot more expected behavior with the arrow function than I anticipate, right? But that way I don't have to. It's like you said. I don't have all these bind statements everywhere. It's the same thing as why don't I need a constructor and a class keyword anymore? We're just evolving. We keep making things. I don't know.
So to learn about that, just Google, watch the YouTube videos on this binding with arrow functions.
Yep.
And they'll explain why you don't need to bind and why you would in other instances.
And in your React components, if you never want to use the bind keyword ever again, just write your methods like this. Hello. Cool. This is what I teach my students at Lambda School, is do it this way. Not with this state. I still teach them a constructor because, I don't know, I'll kick that around for a couple more weeks, I think, and then kill it off. But I don't want, it's just one of those things. So it's JavaScript. It's React. It evolves every day. Other questions? Cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a blast. Yes, right here.
Is it possible to get a repo up?
Watch. You ready? You ready? Guys, this is the best thing in the world. If you're ready for this, if you're not ready for this, you should sit down. Oh. There's my repo. Just deployed it straight up to Code Sandbox for you. This right here is going for you. Cool. Yep.